What if the version of you've been chasing is actually the one you've been trying to return to all along? The one before the noise, before the burnout, before you started shrinking to fit a life that never really fit you. This isn't about starting over. It's about returning. Returning to your soul, returning to your truth, the version of you that has always been meant to be. Each week, we're going to offer up real stories, hard-earned wisdom, and practical tools from powerful returns to help you reconnect with who you are and why you're here. I'm your host, Bryan White, and this is The Return Project. Welcome back to our mini-series on addiction and recovery. In this episode today, we get the opportunity to sit down with a guest who has walked through a unique circumstance. She's seen both sides of the spectrum. She's lived both sides of the spectrum. And her story is going to walk us through a portion of experiencing the addiction from the outside and working through grief to walking through addiction herself and how it all came together, but then how at the same time she was able to choose sobriety and pull herself into an entirely new life. The journey that she's walked will inspire you, it'll uplift you, and it's going to show you that we may fall, but we all get right back up. So sitting across from me, I have Ashley Joe. She's here to spend her time with us. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Bryan. I'm excited to be here.
Ashley, I want to pass the floor right over to you and have you take us all the way back and tell us about where it all started and how you got to where you are today.
Let's do it. So I think you did a great job of kind of setting up my journey, which can be very complicated and confusing because there are a lot of different parts and pieces. But let's go back to when I was 23 years old. I gave birth to my son, Cornelius John. And at that moment in time, I was very newly married. I had 2 kids right away. And my husband was fresh out of rehab. So when my son was born, my husband was 5 months sober. And I walked through that entire journey with him. He was not sober when we got married. And so I got to experience all of the ins and outs of addiction. And his addiction in this season started as an addiction to opioids. So he actually went to a doctor and had a back problem and was prescribed methadone, Oxycontin, Percocet, all the things, the conglomerate, right? And he started taking those for back pain. And eventually that turned into not being enough, right? And so he then went out and found more pills elsewhere. And then anytime the pills would run out, he would turn to vodka or beer or any kind of booze that he could get his hands on. So he was a bartender at that time. And let me tell you that, it was about a year of our life. It was messy. It was hard. He worked as a bartender. And so sometimes he would come home at night. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at night. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know if he was safe. Also, Bryan, I was so naive, right? So I knew that my husband had struggled with addiction earlier in his life, but I didn't want to see it. And so I just told myself, he's busy, he's stressed, he's got these pills that a doctor prescribed him. He's anything but an addict, right? But I also didn't know what being an addict, which I don't love the word, but for the intents and purpose of this show, I'll use it a little bit, but I didn't know what that meant. I thought if you're an alcoholic, you can drink, just not too much. If you're an addict, maybe you can use, but you're probably using every day, all the time, nonstop. You never have a moment where you can think clearly. And so I saw my husband and I saw pieces of his struggle, but I didn't want that to be my life, right? It's the first phase of grief is denial. So eventually it got to a point where we had an altercation. He called the cops and tried to have me removed from the house while he was completely high and intoxicated and all the things. And the police were like, we can't make your wife leave her home, sir. So he ended up leaving. And eventually my dad and I kind of did an intervention we were able to get him into treatment. And this was probably Ryan's 5th time in treatment in his life. But this was my first time ever experiencing someone going to rehab like that at that level. So fast forward to my son being born. My husband is now only 5 months sober, and we have a brand new baby. And I am supporting his sobriety in any way I can. He is going to a 12-step recovery meeting every single night, which means then I'm single mom at night while he's going to his recovery meetings, right? I would go to 12-step recovery meetings with him. On Saturdays, there was what's called an open meeting, which means if you are not an addict or an alcoholic, you're allowed to go to the meeting to support your loved ones. So I would go every single Saturday with him. I did anything and everything I could to support his sobriety because I never wanted life to go back to like the chaos that addiction has and that fills with addiction. So fast forward another 5 months. So my son is now 5 months old and my husband is now 10 months sober. And it was my 3rd birthday and my son was diagnosed with a genetic disease that only gave him a 50% chance to survive past the age of 2. So talk about stress. I am sitting there with a, 2-year-old with a husband who's 10 months sober. And my son has now been given a death sentence. There is no cure. There is no treatment. There is nothing you can do for this genetic disease. It's called spinal muscular atrophy. And I found out that information while I was alone. My husband was on a mission trip. And Bryan, I was so scared that he was going to relapse. How do you handle that news when you're early in sobriety and you're just learning how to do life again, right? So I called up one of his friends from the program and I was like, look, when Ryan comes home from his mission trip, I need you to be here because I have to tell him some horrible news. And so we delivered the news to Ryan together. Thank God for the support from people in the program who were there for us every step of the way. And he took the news way better, probably even than I did. But fast forward then another 5 months. So my son is now 10 months old. My husband is now 15 months sober. I'm still young. I'm a 23-year-old young mom trying to hold this world together that's falling apart around me, right? And on January 8, 2009, my son passed away. And it was a beautiful moment where Ryan and I were able to be in the room with him. We were actually able to sing him to the gates of heaven. And yet in that moment, I feel lost because now my son, who had become my everything, he's gone. And now I need to worry more about my husband's sobriety and my daughter and yet figure out who I am in this new world. Because I'm no longer a medical mom. I was a medical mom for 3 months. He spent 57 out of 90 days in the hospital. And so I'm just a little bit lost. But through it all, Ryan was able to maintain sobriety. He kept going to a 12-step meeting every single night. I kept going to 12-step meetings with him on Saturday nights when I was able, if Case wasn't in the hospital. And we had an incredible church community and 12-step community that just surrounded us with love. And then eventually we ended up having to move away from that community. And life took us on a series of multiple moves. And the way that I like to phrase it, we went to, Rapid City, South Dakota, and then to Florida, and then back to Rapid City and to Florida. We were all over the place for a while there. But with every move, we got further away from our church community and further away from Ryan's 12-step home group. And so it's with every move, things got more challenging. They got more difficult. We had less support. We were fighting more. We were arguing more. During that all, we adopted a baby because if we had another baby, there was a high chance that baby would die and we didn't want to go through that again. So just a lot there, right? Like so much there. And as we got further away from our community that supported us, Ryan and I also drifted further away from each other. And so in 2013, our marriage really just completely fell apart. And there was a moment in time where I remember saying to him, like, he was still sober at this time. I want to say that. But if you've ever heard the phrase like a dry drunk, that's kind of what it felt like. Like he was sober, but he wasn't actively working on his recovery. And I wasn't encouraging him to actively work on his recovery, right? So it was just not a fun environment for the two of us to be together. I'm feisty, Bryan. I can talk. I can fight. I can throw some words out that might hurt. He was the same, right? So it's just like a recipe for disaster. So we ended up getting a divorce in 2014. I had an affair in 2013, not something I am proud of at all. Something that I carried a ton of shame for a long time. And when Ryan found out about that affair, he relapsed. And so he had at that time almost 7 years of sobriety under his belt. And so I watched someone who had worked so hard to get sober, who had struggled with addiction his whole life, who the entire time that he was married to me, he was able to maintain that sobriety. I watched that sobriety go out the window. And it's interesting, it didn't really hit me. I was listening to one of the last episodes you released, and I don't have the statistic in front of me, but I believe that your guest was the doctor, and he said that when the spouse is involved, there's a 42% higher success rate. I saw that in front of my own eyes. Like Ryan and I are no longer married and Ryan falls apart. Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying I held him together. I am not. I am saying that to stay sober, you need a community of people who support you, who know where you are, and who are there for you every single step of the way. And every move, and then our divorce fractured all of that for Ryan, and he no longer had a reason to really want to stay sober at that point in time. At that point, we were sharing our kids. And then in 2015, Ryan got a DUI with my kids in the car. And so at that moment in time, my life as I know it changed because I went from being a 50% full-time mom to suddenly being like a 100% full-time mom.
Yeah.
And the state that we live in is one of only 2 states where when adult gets a DUI with kids in this car, they're not charged with neglect or abandonment or anything like that. So he didn't get any other repercussions because my kids were in the car. But all of a sudden, my life changes drastically. I moved to get closer to my family so that I had support as a new single mom. Honestly,
and can I interject here for 1 second?
Yes, go for it.
Now I'm really... How old are you now? When you now you've moved back in with your mom?
Yes.
You're probably only 20.
I think it was about 28-ish. Yes. If we're tracking, I think it was like 28-ish around this time. And so I'm back by my parents. I have my kids full time. I'm newly divorced, trying to figure out life, right? There's a constant theme in my story where I'm just trying to hold the world together, right? And keep everyone around me just doing okay, right? Like just make sure the kids are fed, make sure they're at school, make sure they're okay. And eventually I ended up falling head over heels in love with this man. I thought we were going to get married. We decided to get pregnant and have a baby. In 2017, I gave birth to my daughter, Waverly. There was a ton of drama surrounding her birth and her entrance into the world that led me into a complete spiral of depression and anxiety. I've struggled with depression and anxiety my whole life, Bryan, but I've masked it really well. Like I will not show the world. All the world sees is strong, powerful Ashley who can do anything and hold everything together. And people look at me and they're like, how are you still standing after everything you've been through? Right. But deep down inside, like in here, I'm falling apart. And so what I did was I started self-medicating with alcohol. And it started out as like, I just needed to sleep at night, right? So a nightcap, right? You just have a nightcap and then you go to bed and you can sleep better. And then one drink turned into two and two drinks turned into three. And all of a sudden I'm having 4 glasses of wine before I go to bed. And then all of a sudden I'm having a box of wine, which if you don't know, a box of wine is anywhere from 3 to 5 bottles of wine. And I would literally need to drink an entire box of wine at night in order to sleep. Well, that's not sleep. That's called passing out. And so, I got to the point where I was a full-blown alcoholic and really did not want to admit that, because in my mind, if I admitted that I was an alcoholic and that I was struggling as much as I was, then I was exactly the same as my ex-husband, who, when our marriage fell apart, he's a great man, but when our marriage fell apart, I didn't like him that much. So the last thing I wanted was a label that would make me anything like him. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I struggled. And I think the confusing part for me, my addiction looked so different than his did. He would become addicted and all of a sudden he's like disappearing and you don't know where he is. I drink copious amounts of alcohol and I still get up at 6 a.m. and still show up for work the next day. Right. So how could I be an alcoholic? I'm functional. I'm working. I'm holding a job. I'm taking care of my kids. I'm getting them to school. I'm doing all the things, yet I need a drink to survive. My hands would start shaking earlier and earlier and earlier in the day. And so I'd start drinking earlier and earlier and earlier in the day just to keep the shakes at bay. Right.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where like mentally, I knew I was an alcoholic. I was not ready to admit that I was an alcoholic. And it got messy. Like it got real messy. Mind you, I'm a single mom through this whole time. I also started during this time dating men, because why not? Like when your life's a disaster, why wouldn't you jump into dating men? A huge blessing. I met the man who is now my husband during that time. So I'm very grateful for it. But that was a hot mess when we met. And in 2020, I finally made the decision that like my life was unmanageable and I had to step in front of people and I had to say, hi, I'm Ashley and I'm an alcoholic. And so it started with me just going to 12-step meetings online. And like that was my entry into recovery. And a couple of times I actually got 90 days of sobriety just by going to 12-step meetings online. And then COVID hit and all of a sudden I am a single mom, newly sober, an 8th grade teacher. I don't remember how old my son was at the time, a 4th grade teacher, I think, and a preschool teacher. And I have 3 kids at home with me. Sounds fun, right? Doesn't it sound fun?
Tons of fun.
And so any semblance of sobriety that I had flew out the window when COVID happened. And all of a sudden there's social distancing. There's nobody checking on me. It is like the best case for an alcoholic. Nobody can know what you're doing except your kids in your house and you can just hide all day. Right. And so all of my sobriety flew out the window. And in August of 2020, I finally reached that low where I was like, I need help. And I went to a meeting drunk online. I was completely plastered. And there was a person in the meeting that I knew I was going to message because he worked at an online treatment center. And for me, going to rehab the way that Ryan did wasn't an option because I'm a mom and I was simply not willing to step away from my kids for a full 30 days, even though I probably needed to, right? To me, that was a huge barrier to entry for me getting the help I needed. But then I heard about this online program. So I'm in the meeting drunk and I'm messaging this guy and I'm like, hey, you're awesome. I hear you work at a treatment program. I'm a mess and I need help. What do I need to do to get into your program? And immediately he had an admissions counselor call me. I took the call drunk. Don't remember the call. Heather, if you're listening, I love you. You were incredible. That's all I remember is her name. But I made the decision to do an online intensive outpatient program. And so I went to my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and my parents and my kids that night. And I think I cried, but I don't really remember. But I told them I made the decision to get sober, tomorrow's my first day in treatment, and I'm sorry, and thank you for supporting me, and I'm going to do this. And I white knuckled my way through the first 90 days of sobriety. I transferred my addiction to exercise just to stay sober. You can't lose your kids for working out 3 hours a day, but you can lose your kids for drinking all day. So in my mind, a better trade-off, right? I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. Some days I went to 2, 3, 4 hours of online meetings just to keep my brain occupied, because for me, drinking wasn't about feeling good. My mom always says, she's like, Ashley, I remember asking you one time, like, do you just drink because you just love how it feels? And I was like, oh, Mom, if you think I drink to feel
good, yeah.
I drink to feel nothing. I drink to numb. I drink to escape. I drink to get away from all of the shit that has happened in my life, right? And so I get sober, I'm white knuckling it, and I committed to doing the work. I went to my IOP for a year. I did intensive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I continued going to meetings, and the first 90 days was so hard. But eventually what I found was that it got easier and easier to just put one foot in front of the next, in front of the next, in front of the next, in front of the next. And eventually I got to this point where I was like, I'm not thinking about drinking anymore. And Bryan, I want to very clearly articulate, in case any of your listeners are listening, that does not happen for everyone. Like the urge to drink or the thought to drink, some people are consumed by it daily, even if they've been sober for 25 years. For me, thankful to God, that wasn't the case. Eventually, that desire to drink went away, and I found myself healing. And I found myself in an incredible place of just like being able to live and cope with life and feel my feelings. And so in 2022, I got engaged to the man who's now my husband. And on April 8th of 2023, we got married. And we are a blended family. So together we have 5 kids, 6 counting K's. So I always answer like, I have 6 kids, but together we have 5 kids. It's a very confusing question. And then just 2 months after we were married, I was in a meeting at work and I got a phone call from my son. And he's 12 at the time. And so I declined it because I'm working, right? Like, don't interrupt mom at work. Mom's working. What are you doing? And he called again and I declined it again, because usually the only time he called was when he wanted more screen time or like needed his Apple ID or something like that. So I declined the call. And I'm in the meeting and I'm leading the meeting. So I'm facilitating it. And all of a sudden I have a Mac. And so my text messages start popping up in the corner of my computer. And they say, Mom, please answer. Very important. Not about technology. Dad just died. And I had been, like, bleh, bleh. I had been through grief before. And I had actually thought about this moment with Bryan, because I remember 10 years earlier being in therapy shortly after my divorce. My therapist said to me, I was so stressed about like wanting to keep him sober, even though we weren't married. Right. And he couldn't do it. Like he would get sober and then he'd relapse, get sober and then he'd relapse, get sober and he'd relapse. And I had to deal with the aftermath with my kids. Like they would come home and they'd be like, we were supposed to be with dad for a week, but we only made it 2 days because dad got drunk. Right. And so at this point, 10 years earlier in therapy, my therapist says to me, and I remember this like it was yesterday, Ashley, your ex-husband has a disease that very well may end his life one day. And the sooner you can accept that you can't control that outcome, you will find freedom. He has to make the choice. And he is the only person who can make the choice. You can't do it for him. And so like this moment, June 5, 2023, 10 years after those words are said to me, I had kind of prepared for this moment mentally. And yet, nope, I was not prepared. I completely went into a state of shock, like actual physical shock. The people who were on the Zoom meeting saw all of this, like this whole next part of the story that I'm about to. I was on the Zoom meeting at work, leading the meeting, and all of this happens. And the woman that I was meeting with, one of them, she said, you literally went into physiological shock. Your whole body went white. Your eyes got huge. You started shaking violently, and I fell off my chair. And so I can explain this to you, but when I explain it to you, Bryan, I was hovering above my body. Like, so I was watching all of this happen, but I was not in my body. I was completely dissociated because I just hear that my ex-husband has died. He is 2,800 miles away with my son. I have no details. I just went into complete and total shock. Eventually, I was able to get my bearings straight. Thank God for my husband. I'm just screaming, shrieking, wailing. He runs in. He's like, what is going on? Right? And finally, I come back to my body and back to my senses. And we were able to get a hold of Azariah and find out that indeed his dad was dead. And reception was horrible. So the call dropped like 57 times. So I'm getting like 5 words at a time, right? Just completely not ideal scenario. And then I had to figure out, how do I get to where my son is 2,800 miles away to get him and get him home and make sure he's safe and make sure he's okay. And did he see it? And was he there? And I don't know anything surrounding the death at this point. All I know is like his history. And so his history would tell me he's, only, I think he was 47 or 48 when he passed away. So he's young, not dying at a normal time in life. My brain can't help but go to, it's probably a drug related death, right? So it wasn't until 6 months later that we did find out that his death was due to a fentanyl overdose. And then I'm walking that journey, newly married, my poor husband, right? Who signs up for this? 2 months in, ex-husband dies, son is coming to live with us. It's mass chaos. I'm dealing with the business of death, all the things. But somehow through that process, I went back to writing. Writing has always been a outlet and a healing journey for me. Starting when my son Case was sick, I started a Caring Bridge journal entry, and just to keep people up to speed. So at the age of 23, I started writing. Then I began writing in my professional life. And so after all of this happened, when I went to treatment in 2020, I had started writing because I was forced to. So they made me write a eulogy about if my life had died due to substance abuse. Then later in the program, they had me write a eulogy if I lived a long and prosperous life. They had me write a letter to my younger self, forgiving my younger self. A lot of different things. I had to write my life story and share it publicly in front of 60 strangers as part of my treatment program, right? So after Ryan passes away, I dove full on into writing. And I told myself, someday I'm going to write a book, right? And I needed to do that because I needed to give a purpose to my pain. And so it became a book. And now that book is going to be released pretty soon. It's called Tides of Grief, Waves of Grace. And it's a memoir of scandal, sobriety, heartbreak, and healing. And really just want to share it because one of the things they talk about in the 12-step program, which this is my 12-step book right here, is that once we have found healing, we are called to share our experience, strength, and hope with other alcoholics and other addicts. And I don't really like using the word alcoholic. For me, I prefer to call myself a person living in recovery or a sober person, but that's because I like the positive side of that, not the negative side of that. But regardless, if my story and my words can help one person, then it makes all of this pain and all of this trauma and all of this turmoil that I've gone through worth it. And so that was my very long spiel for you. I will shut up and let you talk now.
I'm sitting here a little flabbergasted because on one key point, now I have to ask, so how old are you now?
Yes, great question. I just turned 40. So pretty much from the age of like 20 to 40, the last 20 years of my life have just been chaos.
And why I want to ask that is because the majority of what you went through, essentially, you were still just a kid.
I was.
You were young.
100%.
I don't believe that there is any aspect of any of us humans in our 20s to early 30s who could survive half of what you went through there, or would not have gone off the deep end completely. Or like, I'm looking back at myself in my early 20s and going, holy cow, like what we didn't know and how we acted then. It just really puts me in a place going, one, I'm highly impressed of how you walked through all that. Two, it's so, I don't want to say easy, but it's understandable to say that when the body and the mind, we're still trying to figure out our own lives, and then we're trying to figure out someone else's life, and then you lose a child. That right there should have been the breaking point. And
when I lose a child when I was still a child, like I was still a child. I was 23 years old. It didn't really hit me. I'm glad you said that, because it didn't hit me until I went back and started writing that part of my story. As I'm like writing it, I'm like, am I writing about my life, or is this somebody else's life? Because this don't feel like my life, because I was still a child.
Yeah. And so I want to dig into, and I know it might be hard on this aspect, but in the period of time when you've got that diagnosis for your son, and you're spending all this time in the hospital, and you're also dealing with your ex-husband, your past husband there, how did you mentally keep yourself together at that point? What was the piece that wasn't sending you over the deep end then?
Yeah, I think I was like going over the deep end, but I just had to put one foot in front of another. I mean, we have a strong survival instinct, right? And so like literally for that entire 5 months, I survived on adrenaline, caffeine, and Benadryl. So like at that point in time, I didn't share this part. I was drinking in the upwards of 6 to 12 Mountain Dews per day. And my son, when he was home, which it wasn't often because he spent 57 out of 90 days in the hospital, but when he was home, he required around the clock treatment. And so every 4 hours, I would have to do a respiratory therapy protocol for him that took about an hour from beginning to end. And I had to be involved the entire time because like I'm doing chest percussion therapy and I'm suctioning him and I'm using a cough assist. And so that meant around the clock meant 8 a.m., noon, 4, 8, midnight, all the way around the clock. So what I would do is I wouldn't go to bed until the midnight treatment because it just didn't make sense. So right before the midnight treatment, I would pop 2 Benadryl because I knew that by the end of that hour, that Benadryl would have kicked in. It would have me nice and sleepy. And so my addictive behavior started very early on, right? Yeah. And then I would be able to sleep from 1 a.m. until 4 a.m., 3 hours. And then the Benadryl would have worn off enough that I could get up and function and do the 4 a.m. treatment. And when I did the 4 a.m. treatment, I'd pop 2 more Benadryl, do the 4 a.m. treatment. The 4 a.m. treatment gets done at 5 a.m. I'd go back to bed from 5 a.m. until 8 a.m. And then at 8 a.m. I would wake up and I would be up for the day until 1 o'clock in the morning. And so like, how did I survive? I don't know. On Mountain Dew and Benadryl, like praying to God I could find sleep.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not sleeping at all in there. And how did you manage to stay physically functioning? And I'm just actually even now more impressed because that's absolute sleep deprivation. That should send your body into like a physical and mental breakdown. You should be deteriorating at that point. And if you're already not looking after yourself super great, there is no human way that you should have been able to function for a long period of time like that.
So what's interesting, you uncovered this without even knowing it. I did not tell this part of my story, but after my son passed away, I crashed hard and my health tanked because what I learned is like your body can survive on adrenaline alone for a small period of time. And because the season that my son was in the hospital was from October 2 until he passed away on January 8th, that's like a small window of time, right? Fairly small in the grand scheme of life. And so after my son passed away, My adrenaline had been up here. It went down to zero. Like it went down to nothing. And so I started experiencing horrible vertigo. And like where my world would literally just spin. I was a banker at the time. I'd be sitting at my desk. I'd have to grab onto my desk because my body was finally feeling the repercussions of what had happened in that 90 days. There was no longer a reason for my adrenaline to be spiked. And so I just crashed. I went to 14 doctors to try and figure out what was wrong with me. Every single doctor said the same thing. They said, you just had a baby who died, you're stressed. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think my world should be spinning like this. And eventually I went to a chiropractor who was able to help with my vertigo and heal my vertigo. And it's been incredible ever since. But all of that to say, like, literally, I was only surviving. I was not doing anything to thrive. I was not doing anything to enjoy life. I was just doing stuff to keep myself breathing, keep my son breathing, keep my daughter breathing, and keep my husband breathing. That was my only priority was, are the humans breathing? Because if they're breathing, we're okay. And if they're not breathing, we're not okay. Right? Like, so it was survival at its finest.
Isn't it a bizarre, I'm going to call it metaphorical and literal sense that your world was starting to spin? That aspect that, maybe we should recognize that the vertigo and the world spinning is trying to tell us a little bit more, of things in our life. Yeah. From there, you walk through your next season where you're trying to have your husband stay connected with you. And you guys are trying to keep yourselves together. You're going to the recovery meetings. You're going to AAs. And then you started to move. And how did you manage to understand, or it really has me wondering, you had such a core unit of, you said your church and the group and the community. What made you want to start making all these changes and separating?
That's a really great question. So we did not want to make these moves or changes. I left out a piece of the story. So my husband, prior to me meeting him, had spent some time in prison, and he went to school to become a teacher. And he spent all that season in school knowing that unless he got a pardon, he would not be able to teach. And so he went through the whole process. It was after Case passed away and he was granted a pardon, which was incredible. Like, he had a whole team of people there to support him from the recovery community, from the hospital. But then he got a job offer after he got the pardon because his record was cleared, right? And someone in human resources found out about his past, even though his record was sealed, and they rescinded the job offer. And then at that point in time, they told us, and Ryan, you'll never get a job in this school district ever. And it was like a threat, right? Like, don't even try applying because we will not hire you, is basically what they were told. And his time in prison was drug related, right? And so we did not want to move, but the other side of the state was willing to hire him and look past his criminal history. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He shared it with everybody. But we didn't want to leave. We felt like we were forced to leave in order for Ryan to pursue his dream. Honestly, Bryan, we did not realize until we left how your last guest talked about this. Like, there are some good 12-step meetings and there are some not so good 12-step meetings. We did not realize how good the 12-step community here where I live now still, here in this community was, until we were gone. And we didn't realize that that's something that not every town and not every community has, that some 12-step recovery meetings are 99% people who are mandated to be there by the court, not people who want to be there, right? And that just creates a different environment. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, we did not want to move, but for Ryan to pursue his dream to teach, we had to move.
Sometimes we take those big risks and we don't always see, or we can't see the other pieces that are going to come out of them, right? You never get to know. You make a decision about taking a risk for an opportunity, and sometimes you have to see where it takes us. And It doesn't always lead us down the right roads, but I truly believe that all of these moments, they do happen for a particular reason. It's all part of our path.
Mm-hmm.
As you're charging forward, you've now made all these moves, you've kind of bounced around and things have started to separate and fall apart. For you yourself, are you starting to crumble even further? Like you're starting to dive into the drinking, and where I want to figure out is, where is the moment that you chose to start drinking, and why was it not some other coping mechanism? Why did you not choose to go to drugs? Why did you not choose to go to some other substance or activity? What chose the alcohol?
Yeah. So I did first. I was a workaholic before I was an alcoholic. And so this whole season where we move, I get a new career and I experience incredible success at that career very fast. That's what led to our second set of moves, was my job. And so when I say workaholic, I don't mean like I worked from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. I just poured every morsel of my being into my passion, which was my job. And so it started there. And then this next story, this is going to sound like I'm passing the buck and blaming Ryan. Do not hear it this way. I am not blaming Ryan. But when our marriage was falling apart tremendously, we lived in Florida and I was pouring myself into work. In Florida, he was not able to get a job as a teacher. Again, they refused his teaching license. So he was a stay-at-home, I don't know what, skateboarder during that season of our life. And we were arguing all the time. And so one night he walks into the house with a 6-pack of Wild Blue Premium Lager, which is like a blueberry beer. And my heart sank down to below the ground because I thought he had relapsed. And he looks at me and he's like, no, this is not for me. This is for you. You are freaking out of control, stressed beyond belief. You need a drink to take the edge off. And Wild Blue Premium Lager is a beer that's 8% alcohol by volume. So it is quite strong, right? And so I had 2 drinks and I went to bed and I slept like a baby. And I did not worry at all about life or Ryan or that our marriage was falling apart. And so that's when it started creeping in to my life, was like, I would drink to sleep, right? But then it wasn't until I got divorced and I was dating again, and I was dating a man who played baseball, and his family, it was the first time I was ever introduced to day drinking, right? Like day drinking is a thing. I didn't know this because I skipped college. Like I didn't really skip college, but I had a baby. So you can't like do all the partying crazy things. So all of a sudden I'm introduced to day drinking at baseball games, and then day drinking that turns into night drinking. And I'm like, this is like, it started out as like what I say, you pointed out, I was a child when I went through all of this. All of a sudden I'm experiencing what my 20s were supposed to be at the age of about 28, right? I'm living like an 18-year-old. It was wild. It was reckless. It was so irresponsible, but it was so much fun, right? And I could drink like in the book, they call it a problem drinker. Like I would never have one. Like, why would you ever just have one drink? That's a sure sign that I'm an alcoholic, by the way. Like, why would you ever have one drink? I want to feel really good if I'm going to drink. And so it started when I was dating that guy. And then that turned into like all of the excuses in the world when I'm a single mom. You deserve a drink at the end of the day. You've worked so hard. I'm a high level executive parenting 3 kids by myself. I deserve this drink. And then I was drinking more and more to sleep. Yeah. But then eventually it went from being fun, and like the line is blurred. It went from being fun to being horrible. Like where I'm drinking in my house by myself, I would keep a bottle of vodka or a bottle of Bacardi Limon underneath my bed skirt, just in case I woke up and I didn't feel good and I had the shakes, I could drink it. I would hide my empty beer cans in my drawers so that my kids couldn't see them. And like, as these things are happening, I know I'm a full blown alcoholic. Like, normal people don't hide beer cans in their drawers. So if you're listening and you're hiding beer cans in your drawers, there is a meeting for you. But I wasn't ready or willing to admit it. And it took me getting to such a dark, dark place, Bryan, where I didn't really get into this, but I had two instances of complete suicidal ideation where I actually attempted suicide because I didn't know how to get out of the crazy merry-go-round that I was on. I didn't know how to stop drinking. I didn't know how to be a single mom and do it on my own. I didn't know how to keep the mask up because I was still hiding it from everyone. Like, people that I worked with, they had no idea I was struggling. They knew I had a problem drinking because I would go out and party with them and becoming like incoherent, but they didn't know at which level it was. And so why alcohol? Honestly, alcohol is socially acceptable. And I think that's what makes it so dangerous. I work for a holistic health company. And so, like, taking a drug for something, that wasn't an option. That was a non-negotiable for me. I would not take a drug, right? But
Wait
alcohol.
You're telling me you were working for a holistic company while still putting a toxic substance of alcohol in your body?
Absolutely, because it's socially acceptable. And that is where the weird fine line of society and mommy wine culture is. I'm like, I'm not taking an antidepressant. I'm not taking an anxiety medication. During this time, Bryan, I'm working out daily. I am eating so incredibly healthy while I'm downing a vat of wine before bed. Like, it makes no physical sense. And I think that's the power of the disease of addiction is like, you literally convince yourself, I'm doing all the right things, so my drinking is not a problem. I'm gonna eat healthier, and that's what's gonna help me. I'm gonna exercise more, and that's what's gonna help me. And it's like, all the goods don't outweigh or negate the box of wine that is making me incoherent and making me unable to parent my children.
So I want to spin us a little bit fast forward here to the point where you've now got to the darkest point and you recognize there's a problem. You can't go on like this. Something has to change. You've got to that point where you know that if you keep going like this, it's not going to end well.
Mm-hmm.
What was that feeling? What was that emotion that led you to make that crucial decision, that moment in time where you said, I need help?
Mm-hmm. So there were two things, and I wish I could say the first one happened immediately, like the change happened immediately, but it didn't. So I reached a low point where I decided that, like, I could just drink myself to death. Like, and then it's like, it wasn't a suicide. I just like drank myself to death. You know what I mean? But like, whatever. And so 2 6-packs of very strong beer, which that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you pound them very fast, it is a lot. And I went in my garage and I turned on my car and I shut the garage door and I drank until I passed out. And I woke up several hours later and I was obviously still alive. And that's because my garage door did not seal shut at the bottom. So oxygen could get in and carbon monoxide could get out. And so I felt the first thought in my mind was like, you're such a failure. You can't even do that, right? Like, who fails at that? But then the very next immediate thought in my mind was, God has a bigger and better plan for you, Ashley. Immediately. Next thought in my mind, God has a bigger, better plan. You're here for a reason. Something else big is happening. You just need to find your purpose and you need to believe it and you just need to put one foot in front of the other. I wish I could say I got sober at that exact moment in time. I didn't. I still struggled. But a handful of months later, it got to a point where I realized that My sister and my best friend were both nurses. They're both mandatory reporters. And they were constantly teetering on the line of like, we got to turn you into CPS, Ashley. And they didn't because my oldest daughter was old enough to care for my youngest daughter. And then my son was just kind of like surviving, right? So they never did. But it got to a point where I really realized, like you said, if something doesn't change, this will not end well. And I knew how this will not end well would end. It would end with me no longer being alive. And I knew that my kids needed me. And I knew that I wanted to keep living in this world. And I wanted to keep the man that I loved in my life. And I was pushing everyone away because I hated myself. And there was just something about that day in that meeting where I knew if you don't ask for help now, Ashley, you will lose everything. And something about that just led me to find the courage to send a message drunken to a man who I knew had a tool in his toolbox that I did not have, who had the experience, strength, and hope of this program, and who could say, hey, let me walk alongside you and let me help you find this journey, this book that I'm holding. I know people can't see it, but it says Survival Guide. And this is the big book of AA and the 12 steps and 12 traditions. And what's interesting, I don't still go to AA meetings. I would if I needed to, but I don't go anymore because I am at a point where I am really great without going to them. Some people go to them for the rest of their life. If I ever have a rough day, I'll go to a meeting. But I'm doing really good, which is a blessing from God.
You've now started to make that transition in your life. You've sought help. You've worked through the programs. How much of a community did you pour yourself back into, and what kind of a community did you find? Did you start to feel like you had refound a community like you had before?
Yeah. For me, my community looked different than Ryan's did out of necessity. In fact, Bryan, I have never stepped foot into a 12-step meeting for myself. I've stepped foot into many 12-step meetings for someone else, but never for myself. But that's not because I wouldn't. That's because I was a single mom. I couldn't just leave my kids to go to a meeting. So for me, my entire community was built online, which I think is something that many people don't even know exists as an option. And so my best sober friends, my longest sober people that I know, they're all in different states and different locations, and some of them even different countries around the world. But they're all people that I've got right in my phone that I know if anything came up, I could pick up the phone and I could call them and I could say I'm struggling. I also found a podcast was kind of my first way into sobriety. And I just started listening to the podcast every hour of every day when I wasn't in a meeting. And the cool part is I eventually started working for that podcast, and I am really great friends with that host. And so when I first listened to her episode, I was like, gosh, she's cool and she's enjoying life. I wish I could be her friend. And now how cool is our world that like she's my friend, even though we've never physically met in person before. So my community was all online out of necessity because I was a single mom and I could not step outside of my door to go to a meeting without finding someone to come and watch my kids. So like, don't use that as an excuse because there are other ways to get help.
I think it is the coolest factor that technology allows us to connect in so many different ways, whether it is through online meetings for people to find support for anything that they're struggling with, or even I always tell people when I first meet them onto my podcast here that I love more than anything meeting people around the world and hearing these stories and making friends. Some of my greatest friends now, some of my greatest mentors are people who live in different countries, that live in different places around the world. I'm actually getting a globe very soon. It's on order that I'm going to start putting pins in of all the places I've met people.
I love
because
it.
I think it'll be really cool. But back to it is the factor that we now have these tools and we all have the ability to use them to connect with anybody for any reason around the world at any time.
Yeah. It's so cool. I mean, it saved my life. Honestly, it saved my life. If it weren't for technology and if it weren't for Ryan introducing me to the program back in 2006 for the very first time and technology, I wouldn't be here today. Period. Dot. I wouldn't.
So now you've got to the place where you've gone through it and you found your sobriety. I want to know how your beliefs around your self-love, around what alcohol looked like to you, how you showed up on an everyday instance started to change. How did you start to find your self-love and really, I don't know, take a 180 to your life and put you where you are today?
Yeah, it was a long process. And number one, first and foremost, I had to identify why I was picking up the drink in the first place, right? Like a lot of people, they stop drinking and think it's the alcohol that's the problem, but don't realize it's their hand reaching for the drink and putting it up to their mouth. That's the real problem. And we have to figure out why that hand is reaching out and picking up that drink. And for me, that involved confronting every single demon that I had in my life. It meant that no stone could be left unturned. It meant that I had to look at every single way my brain processed thoughts and emotions and trauma. And it meant going back and reliving some of the worst days of my life in order to get to a place where I could say I hated myself. And that was why I was drinking. I was filled with shame, filled with anxiety, filled with self-hatred, filled with shame. And that is what led to me drinking, was not wanting to feel all of that. And then once you've discovered, okay, there was a lot of self-hatred there, then it's rewiring your brain and your thinking patterns to learn how to love yourself again. And so I went through cognitive behavioral therapy. This is just what worked for me. And we literally learned to rewire what some of my core values and beliefs from childhood were. And so a couple of cognitive distortions that I struggled from personally were black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, and jumping to conclusions. And so an example of that would be like, I had a belief in my head that no one would ever love me because of my baggage, because of my story. And so through a process of a year of therapy, I was able to flip that cognitive distortion. And I was able to realize that instead of my story being the thing that like no one will love me for, if I just lean into it, people can actually love me more because of my story. Mm-hmm. And I can use my story as my greatest strength. But going through that process was insanely difficult. I remember one therapy session in particular where my therapist was trying to break down some of my cognitive distortions, specifically the one around like, no one will ever love me because of my baggage. And he said, okay, Ashley, I want you to put your attorney hat on. I'm not an attorney, but I would love to be, Bryan. And he's like, I want you to present to me all of the evidence that you have to convince the judge and the jury that that statement is true and factual. And I sat there quietly for a while and I got tears in my eyes. And I was like, I don't actually have any evidence that I can present to you. And he said, exactly right. Let's start right there. By anytime that you start feeling a strong thought pattern coming in, like this person hates me because of XYZ, put your attorney hat on and say, what facts and evidence do I have to show that that is true without a doubt, beyond reasonable doubt? And if you don't have facts and evidence, that's just your brain and your trauma playing some tricks on you. That's just your brain wanting you to convince you that that's what's going on. And that, Bryan, It's not like I rewire my brain and like, I'm better. Like that's an everyday choice still today.
So now you've walked through this mind-boggling story, like you've just experienced a life and a half, and you still have so much life to live now. I want to know what life looks like for you today. How are we showing up? How are we loving ourselves? And where have you brought yourself today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Life is still hard. Let me not lie to you. Like life is still hard. I am married. We have 5 kids together. Our family calendar is bursting at the seams. It is beyond busy. Like it would give some people a panic attack to look at my calendar. But because of my program and the tools that I have in my toolbox, I don't worry a single day about, am I going to pick up a drink or not? I have structure. I have routine. And for me, that gives me peace and sanity. I spend time outside every day. I wake up every morning at 5:25 a.m. and my husband and I go for a walk. We spend the first 35 minutes outside in fresh air, getting fresh air into our lungs. And yes, we do that in the winter too. And you know what that's like because you live in Canada. But it's great to start our day off like that. I still work a very busy and very demanding job that I love and am extremely passionate about, but I have set very clear boundaries between work and my family life. I am up early, working early, and when I shut my laptop and I don't look at it again. And my entire team knows if they need me outside of working hours, they're going to have to call or text because I will not be checking my email. I will not be looking at my email because when I do, that's a dangerous game. It makes my mind get really active. And then I have a hard time sleeping. And then that's when it's like, oh shoot, anytime Ashley can't sleep, she's at risk, right? I work out every single day without fail. And I am very active in my church community. So my sober community is all online, but I am very active in my church community. I go to a Bible study every single Tuesday night. My family goes to church every single Sunday. And on weekdays, I am bringing, like I say, my job is for my 9 to 5, right? But my real job is being a mom. And that means that I'm carting kids to sporting events every single night of the week. And so that's kind of what recovery looks like for me today. But a big piece of it too is just giving back to other people. I have to tell my story. Some people don't. Some people have this story and they just want to hold it close to themselves. And that is okay. Like if that is you, that is okay. For me, I feel called to tell my story because I think of the stories that I heard when I was in my deepest, darkest moments where I was like, if that person can recover, maybe I can too. And I have to share to give some hope back to other people because that gives purpose to my pain.
I want to bring us forward here with a couple of really intriguing questions. Taking everything you've learned now, walking the life you've lived, if you could go back and give your 20-year-old self one of the greatest pieces of advice that you now know, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would say remember who you are. Remember who you are. Because for me, I went through an identity crisis, and that's what led to my addiction and my alcoholism. I was Case's mom, but then Case is gone, and then who am I? I was Ryan's wife, but then Ryan's gone, and then who am I? I was a business successful executive, but then that's gone, and then who am I? Right? And so remember who you are. And if you don't know who you are, start there. But remember who you are and never, ever, ever.
Now, charging forward into the future here, you have your upcoming book that you are about to release. Do you have any other big, hairy, audacious goals or big things ahead that you want to conquer?
I mean, let's start with the book, Bryan. Let's not get ahead of ourselves too much. No, I just want to continue speaking publicly and sharing my story with the world. So I've gotten the opportunity to do that, to speak on a few stages. And so I'm also hoping to launch a podcast towards the beginning of next year. Again, I did one for a while. I'm hoping to relaunch that, but really just bring my message to as many people as I can in as many ways as I can, not because it's about me or about my story, but because I believe that there are so many people in this world who are suffering silently, who are doing a really good job or maybe a not so good job of putting up that mask and telling the world I'm okay, when really they're falling apart behind closed doors. And I just want to show them that like the life of their dreams is just in front of them. And that also it's not a fairy tale. It's still hard. Even when you get your dream life, it's still really, really hard because that's life. Welcome to life. But when we do it together and we support each other and we live authentically and we live vulnerably, that's when we can really be true to who we are as a person.
Love it. I'm sitting here just saying, yep, I'm just taking in every word you've got to say here. Loving this. So this seems like a great place to bring our conversation full circle. And at the end of every one of my podcasts, I like to pose a really deep and powerful question. The question I pose to everybody, and I love hearing these answers, is, Ashley, what is your definition of truly living your best life?
My definition of living your best life or my best life is being my most honest, authentic, and vulnerable self. Because I think if I try and hide that, it's never going to be my best life.
Again, still sitting here taking this in. When we walk in our authentic shoes and we show up as our most powerful selves, that's when we can pour back into the world with abundance. That's when we give ourselves the power to share our stories and transform not only our lives, but transform somebody else's life. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today. Your story has been powerful, inspiring, and moving. This conversation has been beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
That's a wrap on today's episode. A heartfelt thank you to our guests for showing up with honesty, depth, and wisdom. And thank you for listening in. I hope something in this conversation stirred something in you, a memory, a reminder, or maybe even a return to a part of yourself that's been waiting. If you enjoyed this episode, can I ask a quick 30-second favor? Share it with someone you know, someone who might need to hear this message too. And don't forget to explore past episodes. There's so much more waiting for you there. Until next time, I'm your host, Bryan White, and this is The Return Project.